Hello and welcome to the Cardinal News of Virginia, a podcast from Cardinal News. We cover Southwest and Southside Virginia, and we're nonprofit and independent. We're at cardinalnews.org, and I'm Dutchie Jesse. The Cardinal podcast is sponsored by Muneris, serving communities with expert group benefits and Medicare solutions. Today, we're talking about how covering campaigns has changed in Virginia. They've changed everywhere, but we're going to be talking with two Cardinal News journalists. One of them is Elizabeth Beyer, who covers politics and policy for us from Richmond. Hi, Elizabeth.
Hey, Dutchie.
Thank you for joining us. And then Dwayne Yancey, who has been a longtime reporter in Virginia and columnist and coverer of especially politics for many, many years is what I'll say. Dwayne, you're also our founding editor. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah. My standard line is I've been covering politics since the second Grover Cleveland administration.
Well, and since before social media, and for some people now that's a real marker, like, they've only been alive during social media. So, so you'll have some interesting contrasts for us on what it was like back then, what it's like now. And I thought it would be fun to talk to both of you about the current state and the ability of journalists to cover these campaigns. And we're going to stick with statewide right now because it's a big election year in Virginia. Dwayne, when you, off the top of your head, think of a way, if you were distilling this for maybe a class of people, meaning a class in school somewhere, even in college, what would you distill it down to in terms of the fundamental changes that are affecting journalism, access to candidates and access to information, and then also accessibility that the electorate has to candidates?
Sure. I would say two main things. One, candidates today interact with the general public a lot less than they used to. And two, journalists have a lot less access to candidates than they used to. Campaigns today are much more scripted than they ever were before. There are lots of reasons for that, and we can fill the whole podcast with that. The main reason I would blame is the rise of social media. People may not realize they have less access to candidates because they may feel they have more, because candidates can now speak directly to voters through social media, and that's good. Certainly good for the candidates. But a lot of that, maybe all of that is sort of fake interaction.
Yeah, that's a great point about it's like the appearance of accessibility because of social media, to point out that, a candidate's social media pages and feeds, and that's still carefully curated if it's coming from that candidate's page. There's the whole team that used to just write press releases or show up at in-person press events and hand physical paper to us reporters. That's still a team. But they're just, instead of handing paper to you, they're posting what they choose to post in that social media. Is that what you're getting at?
Yes. I mean, it used to be, a candidate would typically come to town, and here are the things candidates are no longer doing, or doing a whole lot less. They're not speaking to as many groups. It used to be, candidates would come to town, and they would always speak to the Salem Rotary Club. They'd speak to the Chamber of Commerce. They'd speak to this, that, or the other. They're doing a lot less of that. They will hit all the fairs and festivals. I mean, if a candidate was coming to Roanoke, even if there wasn't an event going on, they would make a tour of the city market, to shake hands. Now, a lot of that was staged too. I mean, they wanted TV coverage. They knew they weren't going to be able to meet every, voter in Roanoke. But they don't do that because that is, you never know what some random voter might say to the candidate. Which, as a journalist, that was great. We live for those moments. But campaigns today rarely subject their candidates to that sort of, risk.
Yeah. I can remember standing at a press event set up. These candidates would hit lots of cities in one day if they were announcing something like a bill or even just running, but they would travel to various cities on their list for the day or a couple of days, and stand there and then ask questions. Do you have any questions from the lectern there? And you'd either ask them right then and there or pull them aside later to get your own cut from it later. And you definitely aren't seeing that. And your point about that is the risk involved. Elizabeth, you have been covering for several years now, covering politics and policy in this business in general. But this year we had a debate recently among the top of the ticket in Virginia, Abigail Spanberger and Lieutenant Governor Earl Winsome Sears. You accessed that to cover it. How were you there in person in Norfolk, or was that a pooled event on media coverage?
So I was not, there in uh, Norfolk in person. I think there maybe was only like one Richmond journalist who was there in person during the debate. But I watched it like millions of others, I'm sure, did, or hundreds of thousands of others did, and that was online through their broadcast. Um,
So, how did you feel about the debate? And we're not getting into opinions on candidates. What I'm talking about is, as a journalist, did you learn things? You cover, like I said, policy and politics, but policy. So you're at it trying to learn something new during this debate. And how'd that go for you?
So debates aren't great spots for candidates to like present their policy because, as Dwayne has pointed out in his columns, candidates only get like 30 to 60 seconds to talk about or to respond to whatever question the moderators pose to them. So you can't really get into like a detailed policy discussion or a detailed presentation of policy, but you can start to kind of like present ideas that you have as a candidate to the public, should the public, be interested in those items. But I think during this past debate, what we saw was, there were little hints at policy, maybe from one or one of the candidates, I'll say. But a lot of that was just kind of like drowned out by, interruptions and crosstalk. And it wasn't exactly, the debate wasn't exactly conducive to, presenting new policy standpoints or new policy ideas, which was, frustrating from someone who looks into policy and covers policy.
Right. But it's not like that was your first attempt to learn about these candidates. So again, you're covering this year round. In the past, as you have reached out to the candidates and their campaigns, and we'll stick with the governor's race for now, have you gotten some good response, or do you ask specific questions? And Dwayne's laughing. Dwayne, jump in a second, but I want Elizabeth to answer because Cardinal News also does a giant voter guide, and we send questionnaires to candidates. We really try, as do a lot of news outlets still, to get some information, some actual information, so of substance on the candidates about what they would or wouldn't do versus just like seeing an ad on YouTube. So Elizabeth, how has your communication been, in your opinion? How's that process been for you, reaching out to try and get news and information about these candidates and what they would do if elected?
Like pulling teeth, honestly. It seems like, both of the candidates don't want to present their policy or their ideas. Honestly, that's what it seems like to me because, maybe you'll have like on their websites, you'll go to their websites and you'll see like maybe under like a policy page, you'll see like maybe one buzzword or one like immigration or education, and then maybe like a very, high level. Mm-hmm. This is what we want to do. Like it's party platform, but it's not detailed. And it's like these people are seeking statewide office and they're going to be serving, as the current governor Youngkin likes to say, they're going they're going to be serving like over 8 million bosses, and they're not exactly doing a great job in presenting themselves in the interview process for the job that they're seeking to, get elected. In my personal opinion, obviously, I'm not supposed to share my opinion, but I just want policy details, and it seems like there is none.
Dwayne.
Well, let me tell you how things used to be.
Let's go there.
And to prepare for this, I had a conversation with a former statewide candidate, former governor and former Senator George Allen, about how things have changed and why, just to make sure that I wasn't hallucinating and remembering things that didn't exist. But he assured me that I was right. You've got a couple things going on. Candidates used to spend a lot more time talking about policy. Now the problem with talking about policy is, any detail, some candidate might run afoul of. So, there's the trend to say as little as possible. And if they do have a particular detail, it's probably been, poll tested and whatnot. But you've also got the decline of newspapers as important institutions and really sort of gatekeepers. And it used to be the candidates would go around to the state's newspapers partly to convey that they were serious, because they knew the newspapers had a lot of reach, which they don't have today. And, they wanted it to be conveyed that they were, a serious candidate. So, as recently as 2017, which is Ralph Northam versus Ed Gillespie for governor, I remember both candidates coming to the Roanoke Times to sit down for extended interviews, about where they stood and what they would do. Northam showed up alone, talked for an hour, took any question, that could be thrown at him. Gillespie showed up with an aide and a thick briefing book. And I recently found still online his policy positions from that year, which, in comparison today are very, very detailed. But you no longer have newspapers serving that function. And, let's face it, the public is not as interested in details as we are. There are many voters who are just happy to know, who's the D and who's the R, and that tells them all they need to know. We're in much more partisan times. Candidates no longer need that gatekeeping. They can speak directly to voters through social media. But they're not talking policy. And just to sort of jump ahead here, maybe the fact I'm about to relay will change by the time this podcast airs, though I doubt it will. But there are multiple candidates running statewide who have never this year held a news conference in Roanoke. I mean, that is just unheard of. I mean, in the old days, every time a candidate came to town, they would want to hold a news conference, to get on TV, get a story in the newspaper, and they would take whatever question was thrown at them. That didn't mean they would answer, but they would, subject themselves to that. Yeah. And now there are some who've just never done that. And, they may not be punished for that at the polls.
There was also something else that happened with sort of I don't know if it's unprecedented, Dwayne, you can tell me, but here at Cardinal, we had extended an invitation. We started this process of asking last December at least. So December 2024, I'll call that the beginning of it, although our planning started before that, our potential planning, because we were going to partner with PBS Appalachia using their new studio down in Bristol. And I know because I've had it on my calendar in September to hold a debate, televised debates with the candidates for governor in September. We started extending invitations, letting people know about that in December. So plenty of things are in the air in December, like I get it. But you also know you have to get on calendars early, and that's why we started so early. Dwayne, you have been our ear on the ground talking to campaigns about, hey, any thought? Are y'all going to come to this? Are we going to do this? And letting us know. So it turns out we never got them to agree to that, and that was really new. That was different. Of just like, you're not going to have a single debate over in the western part of the state, um, and get that tradition, checked for this year. So tell me more about that from your perspective and what you were hearing.
Well, the number of debates has gone down.
Mhm.
I hate to keep talking about the old days, but
But that's why you're here.
you know,
We're talking about it.
yeah. In the old days, I mean, I'm sure there were debates that were offered that never happened, but you would have multiple debates, and they weren't really that big a deal because there were so many. I mean,
Mhm.
it was I mean, they were certainly newsworthy, but um, I remember years where there might have been 4 or 5 debates slash joint appearances. The difference being joint appearance being two candidates, same place, same time. But one gives a speech, the other gives a speech, and they're not necessarily debating, but a forum in which you could compare them, side by side on probably the same issues that they were speaking if they had a joint appearance
Mhm.
before a business group. Um, that just doesn't happen. I mean, we barely had one this year. Um, there were none in the lieutenant governor's race.
What would you
That
say?
that's yeah,
Mhm. Yeah.
it's got and the one that is sort of backing up a bit. The one that used to be traditional
Mhm. Yeah.
was always in the summer before the Virginia Bar
Right.
Association. They have a summer convention. Um, this year is at the Homestead. This is now 2 election cycles in a row where the candidates did not agree. 2021, Glenn Youngkin didn't agree because he didn't like the moderator. This year, neither candidate agreed. And that just sort of, shocked me, but also sort of set the tone that, that was always, because of the audience, a very, you know, substantive, you couldn't get before a bunch of lawyers and, just,
Mhm.
talk puffery.
Right. So that's what I started to ask then about, setting aside that one, the Bar Association one,
Yeah.
which was a tradition for a long time.
Mhm.
But your average, just general debate, I'll say. Some people might argue there's no value to that anyway, or very little, because all they do is an extension of their TV ads or their radio ads. They're just, as you were referencing, Elizabeth. So y'all are both journalists. Tell me, am I wrong about that? Would there have been value, in your opinion, if they were going beyond, sound bites and attack and always bringing up their opponent? Or as in the first question of that statewide debate, and Lieutenant Governor Winsome Sears did not really answer the question before she turned and asked a completely different, addressed something different. And they kept beseeching her, hey, we'll get to that later. And so this disregard of, the rules and what's even being asked of them, just a complete disregard and turning to address something different. I think I had a question in there somewhere, Elizabeth. I apologize because I got a little wordy there. So, from your point of view, could there be value in debates anymore?
Well, no, yeah, yes, yeah. I think there's value in debates. I think there's value in debates in the location that they're held. Like, for example, the one that we were going to hold would be located in Southwest Virginia. I think there was the Bar Association, which was located in a little bit further north. I think in like Shenandoah. I could be wrong.
At the Homestead in Bath
Springs.
County.
Yeah.
In Bath County. And it's the idea that these areas matter
Hmm.
to candidates, and the candidates are willing to show up and ask the questions or answer the questions that are asked of them by moderators who are, media, typically media from the area, so they know the area as well, and they're able to ask, area specific questions about area specific issues. But if you only hold one debate in one location and that's supposed to cover all of the state, then you're missing out on some very important topics to some very important people who may be located outside of, that initial, that one location. I'm not saying like Norfolk isn't super important, because Norfolk is super important, but there are other areas and other media outlets that have insight into their communities and the pain points and the issues that those communities are focused on. And while debates don't render detailed policy discussion, the candidates are able to present to those communities, like Southwest Virginia, if they were to agree to the debate that we were going to host. The candidates are able to present to Southwest Virginia reasons why Southwest Virginia matters to them in their bid for.
Along those same lines, Dwayne, you mentioned retail politicking, and just showing up, or in this case, not showing up in certain parts of the state that people used to just go to. There was a candidate last year who got quoted, and it was unfortunate quote for people to pull for him because he mentioned, was it that he was too busy? Was Hung Kao too busy to go to? I mean, I don't want to butcher the quote, but it had to do with a statewide senatorial candidate.
He said Abington was too far to drive for a campaign for him.
Okay. Yeah. So this idea of candidates showing up in particular pockets, because that's where people are, and there are economies to address there, all those things. So what would you say about that? And this is your opportunity to go ahead and quickly promote our voter guide, because we try very hard. We're going to them and trying to locate everything on our website for the benefit of voters.
Sure. Well, let me talk up the voter guide, and then I'll get into the storytelling part. So if you go to cardinalnews.org, up at the top, you'll see somewhere voter guide. Click on that. We have individual pages for all 133 localities in the state. You can look up to see who's on your ballot. We have sent questionnaires to all the statewide candidates, all the House candidates, and all the local candidates in Southwest and Southside. To their credit, all 6 statewide candidates have responded. Many of the House candidates have responded, and many of the local candidates have responded. So you can go there, see what they have to say. As for retail politicking, one, there is just less, period. 2, because of population shifts in the state, both parties pay a whole lot less attention to the western part of the state than they used to. In the old days, once again, in the old days, candidates spent more time in, the western part of the state because it was a bigger percentage of the population, of the state's population then. It was also more contested. I mean, now, the western part of the state is very red with a few blue islands and, Roanoke, Blacksburg, and elsewhere. So Democrats see very little reason to come to this part of the state. So they don't. And, for the same reason, Republicans don't spend that much time out here. When they do, it's to increase the turnout. But, they know they're going to get, 70%, 80% in some of these counties. The question is just how big will that pie be? I certainly understand the math. The state's population center is now in Caroline County. It's not out here.
Right.
But there used to be a tradition, long since abandoned now, that on the final weekend of the campaign, all the candidates in both parties would spend the final weekend in Southwest Virginia. They had rival rallies. They would start on Friday, and the last Friday, Saturday, and Sunday were spent hopscotching from one rally to another in places like Clintwood, Big Stone Gap, Grundy, Jonesville, and you get hundreds of people turning out in these small towns, to cheer on their respective candidates. That was abandoned a long time ago because, one, both parties saw a lot more votes in Northern Virginia than in Southwest Virginia. And as, the region realigned, there just weren't that many Democratic votes. And, if Republicans come, they may pay some nod to that, but, the math leads them elsewhere.
Well, we could talk all day about all this, but we don't have the time. So thank you both for your insights and your feed, just the point of view you have as journalists covering what's happening in Virginia, politics and policy. This affects our daily lives beyond the campaign. So I appreciate your efforts to get as much information as you can and present it. And I should say, just a reminder to people, we're a nonprofit newsroom. We're also nonpartisan. We don't do endorsements. We don't, our aim is to educate and inform people with information. So that's what the voter guide is all about. It's very straightforward. There's bios, there's links in there. There's so much information. So I do encourage you to check that out to learn and be informed. So thanks to Dwayne and Elizabeth. Dwayne is our founding editor, Dwayne Yancey, and reporter and columnist for us. Been around for a long time, doing this for a long time. So I really appreciate your input, and the perspective, of what it was like back then.
You should at least let me tell my aviation stories.
Oh, you know what? My thought was when you talked about making these quick stops in one weekend, I remember John Warner in particular for some reason, but yeah, you meet him at the hangar. Is that where you're going? Yeah, you meet him at that. They don't even come out, right? I mean, into the city. They hold the event right there, right off the plane, and then they get on. That's what they used to do. Yeah.
Yeah. I remember 1989, governor's race, Marshall Coleman, Doug Wilder. Wilder eventually won. Last week of the campaign, I spent with Marshall Coleman on his plane as he flew all around the state. And you had very direct access to the candidate. You could ask questions at the event, or you were there on the plane interacting, and now you just don't have that kind of access to any of them.
Well, that's a great point. And thank you both so much again. So Dwayne, if someone wants to get a hold of you, has any stories they want to share with you or anything like that, what's the best way to reach you?
Dwayne at cardinalnews.org. We're all first name at cardinalnews.org people.
And that's Elizabeth at cardinalnews.org too?
Yes, ma'am. Elizabeth with a Z.
Elizabeth with a Z, Dwayne with a DWAYNE. Thank you both so much, Dwayne Yancey and Elizabeth Beyer with Cardinal News, for joining us on the Cardinal News of Virginia. Thanks everyone for listening, and we want to thank our sponsor, Muneris. Also thanks to Sean Eddy of Eddy Alexander for production support, and to Cardinal News' own Zach Shelton and Sherry Quinley. Read all of our news coverage. We're paywall free at cardinalnews.org. I'm Dutchie Jesse.